God can reverse every negative verdict in your life. You can be free to enjoy all of God's richest blessings. That's why He wants to send you your free packet of Miracle Spring Water, your point of contact for the miracle you need, now in a larger size.
You know, I'm going to miss that bumper because standing up here during the time, it's kind of awkward. It's like, well, it just kind of goes if it's in, right? You guys know, if you've been here over the last 3 weeks, that we have been in the middle of a series that we're calling Awkward. And the whole premise, the whole idea behind this series was really around the idea that a lot of people who aren't Christians think that Christians are pretty awkward. And not just people who aren't Christians, actually we ourselves know that we have a tendency to be awkward, to be weird, to do weird things, to say weird things, to do strange things. And what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks is a lot of that is just essentially based on the unnecessary pressure that we put on ourselves as believers. And so we've talked about all kinds of different things. I talked about the very first week that Christian comedians have made a living off of making fun of Christians because of how awkward we are. And so what we said was that, you know, we need to figure this out, because things like you see in that video, I wish I could say that they're a joke, but honestly, some of that's real. And some of that is the interaction that people have with us. That's how they see us as followers of Jesus. And so kind of my hope is that maybe throughout the series we could change the perception a little bit. But more than that, I just wanted to answer this question. How do we share our faith with Jesus without making it awkward? And so that's where we've been. How do we share our faith in Jesus without making it awkward? We kind of, you know, talked a lot. I've talked a lot. Last week I just shared with you from my heart things that I've tried, experiences that I've had. Because what I said last week is that sharing your faith in Jesus is one of those things that's more caught than taught. You can't just learn how to do it. You can't read a book and know exactly how to do it. You just kind of got to get out and do it. And as you do it, you learn and you get more comfortable with it. And eventually things do become less awkward. But kind of if I wanted to sum up this whole series to this point, this is what I came up with. I was trying to think of a sentence, and this was it. Fishers fish. So relax, make friends, and start fishing. You know, fishers fish comes from the idea that as disciples, we are called to make disciples. Jesus told his disciples, I will make you fishers of men. That is who we are as believers. But we were never asked to do it alone. Jesus said that he will be with us always, to the end of the age. And when he told his disciples to go out in the Great Commission, that he was going to be with them. And part of our awkwardness is forgetting that he's with us and putting all this unnecessary pressure on ourselves instead of leaning and depending on him. And so the just relax piece is just relax, because this isn't on you, it's on Jesus. He has given us permission to relax and take a breath and go, hey, it's just my job really to do these last two things: make friends and start fishing. Make friends and start fishing. That's kind of where I landed last week. That is our role in this, is to, hey, if you want to share Jesus with somebody, start by making a friend. You know, be gentle and respectful. You know, prepare, get to know a person, have conversations, make a friend, and then look for your opportunities to share Jesus. Just start fishing. Well, as a result of this series and kind of the dealing with my own fears, I decided to take a chance. On this past Friday night, I went out and I played a cornhole tournament. Anybody know what cornhole is, right? If you're old school, you don't like that name. It's beanbag toss is what it is. But I went and played a cornhole tournament with my brother, one of my older brothers. And Guys, let me just tell you, it was super awkward. It was super awkward. And I'll give you a little context. My brother has been playing cornhole at this cornhole tournament on Friday night since the beginning of the summer, and he has literally been trying to get me to go for months now. And I've been telling him that I was going to go, but I haven't really made time. I hadn't made space for it, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one thing you just need to know is that me and my brother, we're very different. we're not a lot alike. My brother is as multiple people told me at the cornhole tournament, your brother's a good dude. You know, my brother is a good dude, but he's also a good old boy, right? Like, you guys who grew up in Elmore County, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say good old boy, right? My brother, he doesn't watch TV. He ain't never watched TV since he was a kid. He hunts, and he fishes, and he barbecues, and he works in the yard, and he plays horseshoes, and he rides the roads. He never stops. The guy never takes a break. He's been that way since he was a kid. Even before he could drive, he would ride his bike all over Deatsville, maybe all over Elmore County, finding creeks and fishing holes to fish in. He's just that kind of guy. Me, I'm a homebody. I like to sit at home on my couch in front of my TV and watch movies and relax. You know, that's just who I am. And so we're a little bit different that way. But not just that. I mean, obviously, my faith and my role as a pastor has put me on a little different path than my brother. My brother, you know, he's the kind of guy that makes friends everywhere he goes. He's got a big personality. I think that maybe is something that we have in common. But the difference is I have a filter. He doesn't own a filter, okay? He has no filter. He does not meet a stranger. He'll talk to anybody, even if they're not interested in talking with him, okay? He's that kind of guy. But he's also the kind of guy that would just literally give you the shirt off his back in a heartbeat. So he's the kind of guy you got to take the good with the bad. I mean, literally, he's the kind of guy that may drop 3 F-bombs in a sentence and not even realize he cussed. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, this is my brother, you know? Or he may say something really, really offensive, like where my mouth is just on the floor, and he's like, what? You know? Like I said, he has no filter and needs one, and maybe I have one and don't necessarily need one, but there's definitely a difference between the two of us. But I love my brother. And my brother, he loves me, and as different as we are, we do have a lot of things in common. We enjoy a lot of the same. I'm getting emotional already, guys. Come on. We enjoy doing a lot of the same things. We're both pretty competitive. We love Auburn football. We love barbecuing and watching football and going out on the boat and, like I said, doing anything competitive. And so here's the problem. My brother, because of the lifestyle that he leads and because that's the way he's always been, there's another major difference is he's not a planner and I am. And so he is constantly inviting me to do stuff. But it's like an hour before. Like, he's that guy that calls, hey, man, you want to go fishing? Yeah, when? Next week? No, like 30 minutes. You know, come on. And I'm like, bro, my wife's a nurse. I got 3 kids. Like, I just can't make this work, you know? And I feel like I'm constantly telling him, no, sorry, I can't. Or let me look at my schedule. Or let me check my calendar. And so he's been asking me to go play cornhole with him. And I was like, you know what? I really need to go do that. You know, I actually thought until Friday night I was pretty good. If you guys have been to the Go Team party, man, I got skills, right? Wrong. So I was thinking, yeah, I could do that. You know, I could go play cornhole with him. This sounds safe. You know, I knew what I was walking into. You know, this is in a metal warehouse, and it's just put together on Tuesday and Friday nights. And it's kind of a bring your own beer kind of event, you know. It's a good old boy event. You know, they get together, a bunch of good guys. They have a good time. It's good people, but not necessarily the crowd that I usually hang out with. And so it was going to require me to step out of my comfort zone a little bit. And honestly, I didn't think it would be that big a deal because while I am a pastor now, I used to be a good old boy myself, right? And so I was like, we can do this. Only problem is, knowing my brother, you just got to know, I show up there. He says, hey, man, he told me, we talked 4 or 5 times, hey, you got to be there at 6. Get there at 6, we'll toss around, we'll get warmed up, you know, because he and I were going to be on the team. So, of course, I show up at 6, and he calls me, and he's like, yeah, I'm about 30 minutes away. I'm like, great. So now I'm in this environment that I'm not overly comfortable with, all by myself. And not only do you say, hey, I'm running about 30 minutes late, but I need you to go inside and get us signed up and get us registered. Well, I'm pulled in this parking lot, and all I see is a couple of guys standing around drinking a beer, smoking a cigarette on the back of their truck, taking a smoke break outside. And there's cars everywhere, and I know that I'm not going to know a soul in there. And so, guys, I'm human. I was a little uncomfortable, I didn't know. I mean, I'm like, this is going to be so. And he's like, no, man, just go in. Quit being a sissy. Just go in and get signed up, And I'm like, all right, I got it, So I go in, and I go up to the scoreboard table, and the guy sitting there looks at me like, oh, you're new, And I say, hey, I'm signing up to play tonight. I said, Leroy Campbell and Ben Gwynn. And he didn't go, oh, yeah, okay, so you're Ben's brother. Nothing like that. I was like, well, I guess he didn't tell anybody I was coming either. But there's a good bit of people there. There's probably 100 people there. Guys, it was so awkward. For 30 minutes, I stood over in the corner. I was that guy, I stood over in the corner. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. Cornhole is being played all around me. And these guys can throw. They got these fancy. I'm like, oh, I'm way out of my league. They're wearing gloves, and they got these, professional-looking gear going. And I'm just like, oh, this is going to be bad. And I'm waiting. And, man, this guy, he comes up to me, and he's like, but you look like a little bit like a fish out of water. He literally said that to me. And I was like, well, actually, this is my first time. And he was like, oh, well, welcome to have you, man. Well, why don't you jump on a board? I was like, well, wasn't sure what was going on. He said, oh, they're just practicing. You just jump in with anybody. He was like, what's your throwing technique? And I'm like, do what? And he's like, what's your throwing technique? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I throw the beanbag, And so he's like, oh, so you just throw it, or you got to kind of spin it? Or what? I was like, I guess we'll figure it out tonight, After he said that, I decided I wasn't going to go jump in with anybody. Also, turns out when you go to a cornhole tournament, you're supposed to bring your own bags. So even if I wanted to do a little warm-up, I didn't have any bags. So my brother shows up, and he doesn't have any bags either. Now, he's been doing this since summer. But that's my brother. He's like, oh, yeah, I ain't got no bags either. And so I'm like, bro, how are we going to play when we ain't got no bags? We can borrow some from somebody. Okay, well, ask one of your friends. Why don't you go ask him over there? Me? You're the one to know all these people? And so I'm telling you, this whole situation is just awkward. It's uncomfortable. And at some point in the night, that guy that's come and spoke to me said, so what you do for a living? I said, well, I'm a pastor. He said, a pastor? I said, no, a pastor. And he said something else. I said, no, a pastor, a rich church. And he literally takes his shirt and he puts it over his beer. and he says, I was like, man, I promise, you're fine. He said, well, I grew up, strict Southern Baptist. He hit his beer. And I was like, you got to remember my brother's Ben. He said, oh, yeah, you're right. And took a sip of his beer. And so but again, this was not my environment. And so I found myself sitting there in this position, and I couldn't help but think this. Why have I put myself in this position? Why am I here? Why have I put myself in this position? That literally is what was running through my mind. How did I get here? And I'll be honest, had it not been for this series, I don't know that I would have been there. This series has, getting emotional again. This series has really affected me in a positive way. Teaching it, it's been such a good reminder. And so today I want us to look at a story in Scripture, honestly, that inspired me a long time ago. Back in 2005, 2006, I watched a series similar to this one called Go Fish. Andy Stanley taught it. My voice is going to come back in a minute. Andy Stanley taught it. And man, it had a pretty awesome impact on me. It made a difference for me. And so as I was preparing for this series, of course, I was reminded of that series. And in particular, this story that he shares from the Old Testament. It comes from 2 Kings chapter 7. And honestly, this is a story that doesn't really have anything to do with discipleship. But it does deal with a couple of guys who have a story that parallels with ours. And so kind of to answer my question, why was I there, and to wrap up this series that we've been in, I want us to look at this story together and just see what we can learn from it. I think it's going to be pretty obvious as we go through the story where I'm going with this. But I just want you to stick with me as we look at this together, because I really think this is the perfect way to wrap up the series. The story begins around 850 BC. Or actually, 850 BC. 900 BC, the nation of Israel had been split into two kingdoms, a northern and a southern kingdom. One was Israel, and one is known as Judah. And Israel, the northern kingdom, was really known for having some really rotten kings, really terrible leadership. All throughout, when you read through 1st and 2nd Kings, when you read about the split of the nation of Israel, what you find out is the kings who led Israel were just crooked. They had problems. They abandoned God. They took on pagan practices. They worshiped idols. Just overall, they were just not real good people. And God, time and time again, would try to bring the people in the northern kingdom back to themselves. He would send warnings through prophets to these kings for them to change their ways, for them to come back to him. And the story that we're going to look at today, this is one of those instances. The king of Israel, he had just completely abandoned the laws of God. He had completely abandoned trying to do the things that God had called his people to do. And so God sent Elisha to meet with this king. The name of the king was Jehoram. And he sends Elisha with a message to Jehoram, and Elijah tells him, he said, the Lord is not happy with what you've been doing, and so he's going to judge you. And the way that he's going to judge you is he's going to send your enemies to conquer you. And so that's literally where we're going to pick up the story. And the king, he doesn't believe Elisha. He doesn't really take Elisha seriously. And sure enough, this group called the Arameans, they come and they surround the capital city in Jerusalem called Samaria. They surround the capital city, but they don't conquer it, they besiege it. And what besiege it means is they literally surround it on all sides, and they won't let anybody in or out. And this goes on for months. This was a tactic that people used to defeat their enemies without losing any lives of their soldiers. If you kind of surround a city, you don't let anybody in or out, over a month or two, what's going to happen? Over several months, what's going to happen? They're going to run out of resources, right? They're going to run out of food. And that's exactly what is taking place in the story we're going to look at today. The people in Samaria, in this capital city, the king, where the king lives, they are literally starving to death. Some of the people, not all the people were crooked, and not all the people had abandoned God's law, but at this point, people were just desperate. They had dietary laws, things that they were allowed to eat and that they couldn't eat. You see those all throughout Scripture. They threw all of that out of the window. They were selling, Scripture tells us they were selling donkey heads at a premium, like anything to eat. They were eating something like pigeon dung or something like that. Like they were just eating all kinds of stuff. And then we get to chapter 6, the chapter right before the chapter we're going to look at today, and they even got to the point of cannibalism. And it's just horrible. When you read about it, sometimes when we're reading our Old Testament, we read it like, oh, this is just a story. We forget that this is actually history. These things actually took place. And it'll just turn your stomach reading how desperate these people got. But here's the thing. All that's going on in the city, but where we're going to pick up actually is taking place right outside the city. We're going to look at a story about 4 lepers who were outside the walls of Samaria. And here's the thing about lepers. They weren't allowed in the city. They had to keep their distance from people. And so they spent their lives outside the city gates. But they certainly depended for survival on the people inside the walls. Their family members, the people that they loved who still had something to do with them, would bring them food and would take care of them. So you can imagine in this time where it's more like every man for himself, eat whatever's available. These lepers had a worse situation than even the people inside the walls. And so these lepers are trying to figure out, so what are they going to do? They are starving to death. They know that death is right around the corner if they don't do something. And that's exactly where we're going to pick up the story. And so picking up 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3, it says, "Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, 'Why stay until we die?' Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the..." Oh, sorry. "If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we'll die." So these guys are like, okay, we're kind of out of options. If we stay here, we're going to starve to death and die. If we go into the city, we're still going to starve to death and die. So our best option of 3 really bad options, most likely, guys, we're just going to die. But our only hope, our only chance is if we go over to the camp of the Arameans and we surrender ourselves. At least in their camp, they have food. Maybe they'll take pity on us, but most likely we're just going to die. You know, that's literally how these guys are feeling. They were in a desperate, destitute situation with very little hope. Very little hope. And it says this. It says, at dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. And when they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and their donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. So these guys, they had literally made this decision, this life or death decision that, hey, we're just going to take our chances. We're going to go save ourselves. And they're on the way to this camp. While they were on the way, God sends this sound to the Arameans. This sound, I don't know if it was the wind or just a loud noise, but for whatever reason, the Arameans were convinced that the Israelite king, the king of Israel, had hired the Hittites and the Egyptians to come and have us back. And the Arameans were afraid that they were going to be trapped, that they were going to get stuck between these two kingdoms, and that they were just going to be wiped out. And so in a frantic, freaking out, just going crazy, these guys take off. They take off and they leave everything. They leave their horses, their donkeys, their treasure, their food. They leave their fire still going. All they know is if we don't move soon, we're going to get flanked and we're going to be trapped. And so we just got to get out of here. We've got to move. And so these lepers, they have no idea what's going on. They're just walking into camp. They're just walking into camp. What they don't realize is as soon as they get into camp, they're going to have every single need that they've ever imagined met. Things are going to go from literally life and death to just life, good life, you know. More treasure than they can imagine. More treasure than they can imagine. I think of this scene and I think about, it's funny because I was reading this week and I got a little bit tickled because I kept thinking about Templeton. Y'all know who Templeton is? Templeton is the rat in Charlotte's Web, okay? And I was imagining this scene of these lepers walking into town, and I couldn't stop thinking of Templeton at the state fair. I couldn't stop thinking about this rat coming up to the state fair and just having all this food to eat, all this treasure, just making a glutton of himself, getting himself sick, just going out. I mean, that had an impact on me as a kid, obviously, because that was the first thing that came to mind. But I could just imagine these guys just rolling in and going, we're starving, and look, there's a rack of lamb just on the fire over there, and there's this and there's that, and just going crazy, just going crazy. Again, we don't get the full picture, but it does tell us this. It says, the men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. It's like, man, give us more than that. Come on, these guys are starving, surely. And it says, then they took the silver and gold and clothes. Clothes were extremely valuable at that time because they were handmade. And they went off and they hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things and went off and hid them also. These guys were like, we just struck gold. They walk into camp and they see it's completely abandoned. They're like, this is everything we've ever dreamed. And so they just start going. I imagine them being like kids at Christmas, on Christmas morning, just going in, pillaging, just going after things. And man, you can't help but be a little bit happy for the guys. But in the back of all of our minds are going, but what about the people back in the city, right? Because all of us, we would have done the right thing. We would have saw it, and we'd have grabbed some beef jerky and walked back and said, hey, the city's empty, right? These guys were like, nah. And they literally just went ham. They went ham, going from tent to tent. I can imagine them doing this all night long until it hits them. Until all of a sudden they come to their senses. All of a sudden they step back for a moment. And they realize how awesome this is, but they also realize that they'd only been thinking of themselves, and this is what it says. Then they said to each other, what we're doing is not right. They're having a good time. They're going in the tent, finding all the cool stuff, going in and bearing it, high-fiving each other. I mean, just geeking out over how awesome this is. But they actually get to a moment where they look at each other and they go, man, we've been here a while now. And we've collected more stuff than we could probably ever spend. We got more food than we will ever need. All of our needs are met. We are well taken care of. And there are people back in the city who are starving. Men, women, and children who are who are literally starving to death at this very moment. What we're doing, it just isn't right. It isn't right for us to be here living this lavish life while those people are there. Now, you imagine these lepers, they probably weren't treated real well by the people in the city. That we know that from reading history. But they at least had somebody they cared about there. And regardless of how people treat them, they just felt, they knew what was right. And what was right would be to go back and tell those who were starving about this great treasure of the empty camp that they have found. And so they said this. They said, this is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. I don't believe these guys were bad guys. I mean, when you read that story, it sounds like these guys were actually pretty good guys. And who knows if anybody lost their life in the hours that they wasted as they were pillaging and being a little bit selfish. We don't know that. But I mean, most of us read this and you can't really blame the guys, right? They thought they were walking into their death. And it turns out they walked into the best thing that had ever happened to them. Right? And so we can't really blame those guys. I don't think those guys were bad guys. They just simply had gotten distracted by the great treasure that was in front of them. But at some point, while enjoying it, while being in the midst of it, they come to their senses. They come to the realization that, hey guys, this is awesome, but we got to remember those we've left behind. At some point, these guys had this thought, and this is kind of the thing that I think ties our story and their story together so well. They had this thought: with a great discovery comes great responsibility. With a great discovery comes great responsibility. Are you starting to see the parallel between their story and our story? These guys found a treasure that would save their people. These guys found a treasure that would help those who were starving and in need. They found a treasure that would bring hope when there was no hope. They had something that they were looking back at their city, and they knew there was no way their city would be able to save themselves. The only way the city would be saved is if they shared the treasure that they have. Are y'all starting to get the picture here? These guys had a treasure. They had found this great treasure. They discovered it, and they knew it was their responsibility to share it. Guys, I don't know about you, but Jesus Christ is the greatest treasure of my life. Jesus Christ changes everything. He changed my entire world. He changes the world. I believe that with all my heart. There is nothing that this world has to offer that compares to Jesus. He is the solution to the problem. He is the answer. He meets every need. There's nothing this world throws at us. There's no problem too great for Jesus. And we all know that. If you're walking with Jesus, you know that. We sang about it this morning. There's no circumstance, there's no place where we can be brought so low that we can't put our eyes on our Savior and know that things are going to be okay. And yet, somehow, while enjoying Jesus, and we're all guilty of this, while going to church and making new friends and pursuing Him and seeing Him perform miracles in your life and answer your prayers and by attending small groups, and we forget. We forget about those that we've kind of left behind, don't we? I know I've been guilty of that. I've been guilty of that myself. And I read the story, and when I heard this story, 15 years ago, 14 years ago, man, it had such an impact on me because I was at a place, I'd been following Jesus for a while, but I'd become a little bit insider focused. I'd been focusing on myself just a little bit too much. And man, it moved me. It inspired me. I said, Leroy, you've got a treasure. You've got what the world needs, and you need to be sharing it. It's your responsibility. It is not right for you to keep this to yourselves. And as followers of Jesus, we know that's true. As you were sitting here hearing that story, you were probably having those thoughts. They need to go back. If the story would have just ended with them fat and happy and the rest of Samaria starving to death, we wouldn't have been okay with that. But somehow along the way, as we become more and more insider focused, when we become more and more about meeting our own needs, as we become more and more focused on our lives and our comfort and the things that are going on with us, it's not intentional. I don't think it was intentional for these guys. It's not intentional, but at some point, we just forget. We forget that we need to go back. We forget that we have a responsibility to share what we have, this treasure called Jesus, with the world around us. And so Friday night, I'm sitting there. And man, I don't know the religious backgrounds of these guys. I really don't. I'm sure there were some strong, maybe even some strong Christian men. But the guys that I was sitting with, my brother's good buddies, I could tell just from the several hours that I spent with them that they didn't know Jesus the way that I did. And I couldn't help but sit there as I was thinking, why am I here? Why am I in that position? And immediately think of those guys. Immediately, I felt conviction. I felt, Leroy, this is why you're here. This is what this whole series is about. See, why did I put myself in that position? Because that's who I am as a follower of Jesus. Why did I put myself in that position? Because with a great discovery comes a great responsibility. The reason I chose to go and put myself in an awkward position, because here's the thing, guys, I could have been at home in front of my TV, on my couch with my wife, enjoying myself. If I want to play cornhole, I could set it up in the backyard, invite my friends over, invite my brother over, cook on my grill, eat all the free food I want. It would be awesome. I wasn't there because I was just itching to play cornhole. And I wasn't even necessarily there because I was trying to spend quality time with my brother, even though I was, but he could do that at my house. But see, I had a decision to make. Was I going to step out of my comfort zone, step out of my world and step into his world, or was I just going to stay over here and invite him into my world? Was I just going to stay where I was coming? Man, Ben, you want to spend time with me? Why don't you show up for church on Sunday? You know how many times I've invited him? He never showed up. But I just keep inviting, And honestly, every time we spent time together in the last several years, I'd be honest, most every time was him coming to me. Almost every time. And not because I was intentionally doing that. I'm just busy. I got a lot going on. I have a church that I'm committed to, that I love. I have a job that I love. I've been a part of 3 small groups just about every semester since we launched this church. I wouldn't change a thing. I love it. I love what I get to do here. I love pouring into you guys. I love getting to know you guys. When Katie and I make dinner plans, it's hard because there's so many people that I still hadn't gotten the opportunity to know or to meet. It's like I know my brother, but I don't know everybody here yet. I have a responsibility to this church, and so over time I just got so focused on the things that I thought were important, that I enjoy, that I just kind of forgot. And so throughout this series, I just was reminded that, hey, I need to go. With a great discovery comes great responsibility. I need to step out of my comfort zone. I need to step into his world. I've been preaching to you guys, but it's been convicting my heart. And so I decided to go. And you know what I learned? I learned we need to embrace the awkward. As Christians, we've been talking about how to get away from the awkward, but what I learned on Friday night is that we need to embrace the awkward. It was so good for me. And what I mean by that is this. As followers of Jesus, we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Guys, it was so good for me to be there. It was so good for me to be in that environment. Some of you, it may not be good. I get that. Some of you are like, you're a pastor, but that's what I do every weekend. What you talking about? But for me, it was so good because I was around people who were in desperate need. And so it was such a good reminder for me. I was reminded that this is how they feel when they show up here on Sunday morning. This is how they feel when they get around a group of Christians and feel like they're left on the outside. It was a reminder that I have to be dependent on God. See, I've gotten pretty good about talking about Jesus. But man, in that environment, it's a little bit more of a challenge. And what it forced me to do was lean into my relationship with Jesus. It forced me, literally, as I was sitting there and was having all these thoughts, I started praying for the guy next to me. I start praying that God would give me opportunities. I jump in my car that night and I prayed all the way home. Lord, I'm going back. This beanbag is my reminder. This is a $55 beanbag, guys. Okay, you get 4 of them, but still, $55. I had to go buy them on set because my brother didn't bring any, you know. But I'm going back. I'm going back because there are people who need what I have. And I'm going to step out of my comfort zone. I'm going to step in their world. See, we have a tendency, and again, we don't do it on purpose, but the gravitational pull is for us to become inward focused, to focus on ourselves, to focus on our own needs. And this series, what this series has been about for me is that, hey, I want to be outward focused. I don't want to focus so much on myself. I want to focus on those around me. But here's what you need to know. Being outward focused is unnatural, which makes it uncomfortable. Being outward focused is unnatural, which makes it uncomfortable. Our natural tendency is to do what's comfortable for us. You come to my house and play cornhole. You know, hey, yeah, we can't make it to y'all's house to watch the ball game, but next weekend, why don't you come to our house? Hey, every time making it where it was going to be more comfortable for me. See, what I realized is it wasn't just my schedule. It wasn't just my schedule keeping me from doing these things. It was actually the fear of the awkward. It's the very thing that we've been talking about. I've been scared of it. But what I'm telling you this morning, if you want to make a difference, you've got to embrace it. You got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So here's the question I want to ask you this morning. This is the question I want us to walk away asking ourselves. What comforts are you willing to sacrifice in order to share Jesus with those who desperately need him? Man, I think that's the perfect question to wrap this entire series up. What comforts are you willing to sacrifice in order to share Jesus with those who desperately need him? I told you guys, I'm making a commitment to playing cornhole once a month. I ain't going every Friday night, but I'm going once a month. And you go, well, that's not a big sacrifice. It's a big sacrifice for me. It means time away from my family and my kids. It means stepping into an environment that isn't the most comfortable environment. It means hearing a lot of F-bombs. You know? It means being the oddball out, the guy that's not holding the beer, you know? It means being the guy for a while that doesn't know about anybody else. It means being the guy that really stinks at cornhole. Guys, I embarrassed myself. These guys are serious. It means carving time into my schedule. It means taking a night that I could be with my friends and giving it to strangers. It means instead of inviting my brother into my world, it means me stepping into his world. What does that look like for you? What are you willing to give up? Does it change who you invite to lunch? Who you invite to breakfast? Who you do dinner with? Does it change you answering? I mean, you got that coworker who's always asking, you're like, bro, I bring my lunch. It's too expensive. Maybe you decide, hey, that $7 is worth having a little bit of time with this person, right? Or maybe you're the person that works through lunch, so you can go home early, and you have to sacrifice being able to go home early to get that time with a coworker who needs what you have. I mean, I have a dilemma. I want to know all of you. I want to have all of you in my home. I think about it all the time. I feel like there's not enough of me to go around, but I know one thing. I've got to make room in my life for those who aren't sitting in here. I have to. This series has been such a good reminder of that. That's where we started this church. And so I just want you to be thinking about those things. Man, what club are you going to join? What club are you going to leave? If you go to a gym, do you already know everybody at the gym? Maybe step out of your comfort zone and start getting to know some people. Pull your earbuds out. You know, if you've already met everybody and you know they're all believers, maybe join another gym. I know it's uncomfortable, but that's kind of the point, isn't it? Your kid plays ball at Wetumpka. They've been doing it for 10 years. You know every family up there and they all love Jesus. Well, go play in Millbrook. Again, I know it's uncomfortable. That's weird. That's not what we look forward to, but that's what we got to do. We got to start asking ourselves, if we really took this seriously, if we really believe that we have a treasure that the world desperately needs, what are we willing to do to make a difference? What comforts are we willing to give up? How many nights a week? Maybe do one small group and give those other 2 nights to that person that you don't know doesn't know Jesus? I don't know what that looks like, but I want you to answer this question for yourself. That's my hope, is that you'll walk out of here and you're going, man, I just need to start. I need to make room in my life, on my calendar. I need to do things that I wouldn't normally do, because in order to share Jesus, part of that is embracing the awkward. It is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Listen to this last verse one more time. This is the last verse from the story that we read. It said, then they said to each other, what are we doing? This is not right. What are we doing? This is not right. This is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves. What a powerful message. This is a day of good news, and we can't keep it to ourselves. We have been called by God to share it with the world. And why we got it, I don't know. I can't answer that for you, but I know this. It's too good to keep to myself. It's too good to keep to myself. If I had another week in this series, if I had more time, I know that there's one thing that I would want to share with you beyond this, because I think you guys are primed. My hope is that you are primed, that you are ready to go and share Jesus with people, that you're going to make room, that you're going to make these sacrifices, that you're going to commit. But I tell you this, 6.5 years ago, I was as primed as they come. I remember when we were getting ready to launch this church, the year leading up to this church, 7 years ago, I was excited about sharing Jesus as I have ever been in my entire life. We were having interest meetings. We were just, meeting wherever we can meet, telling people about the vision that God had put on our heart to transform this community, to introduce people to Jesus. And my role, literally, Trip would get up and he would talk about the vision of the church. He'd say, okay, Leroy, you're up. And it really all he really meant was, hey, cue the tears. Cue the tears. Because he knew I was going to get up and I was going to share my story. I was going to share my passion. And then I was going to cry. He knew it. And here's the thing, during those times, I believed with all of my heart that this vision that God had put on my heart, it was going to make a difference. And that everybody that I knew that didn't know Jesus was going to know Jesus as a result of this vision. But I can tell you guys, 7 years later, that's not necessarily the case. Not for lack of trying, but that's not necessarily the case. And so I just want to tell you guys, like I said, if I had another week, we'd spend a whole week on this. But as you go out, I just need you not to forget the things that we've already talked about. This isn't on you, it's on Jesus. So yeah, make room, make friends, get uncomfortable, but remember, this isn't on you, it's on Jesus. I've fallen into that pit of believing it was on me, and I carried a burden that I was never meant to carry. And when you carry that burden, you become bitter, you become angry, you do things that you never thought you'd do, you hide, you pull away. And that's not what he's called us to do. At the end of that story, the lepers, they go and they tell the king. And the king doesn't believe them. He doesn't believe them. And finally, one of the king's men says, hey, we at least need to go check it out. And so they do. And the whole city is saved. But I can't help but think about what if they would have starved to death with that treasure right outside of their gates? What if the whole city would have collapsed with that huge treasure, with that abundant food right outside their gates? What if those guys wouldn't have had the courage to share? That's the world we live in, guys. And it's hard for us. We don't know we don't know if people are going to receive it. We don't know how people are going to respond to it. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. But like those lepers, I can only imagine, even if things went the other way, they would have been glad that they didn't keep it to themselves. And guys, I just want to encourage you, just go, just start. Do not keep this to yourselves. It's too good a news to keep to yourself. Lean into God. Be dependent on Him. Share what you know. and see if it doesn't make all the difference. That's what Jesus did. Jesus gave up his comfort in heaven, and he came here. And he gave everything for us. And you think it's hard for us to experience rejection. Imagine the rejection that he experiences. But it didn't stop him from coming. He knew there would be people who wouldn't receive it, and yet he came anyway. We got to follow his example. Let's pray together.